Before we begin, I really want to talk about is how has the world changed today? And in this new world that we're in for this short period of time as we all are adjusting to our new schedules, I just wanted to take a moment and really bring up the fact is I cannot think of a time when the internet has been so vital to our society as a whole. Our world has changed, and what used to be convenience has now become a necessity. So I use these as a few examples. People who were used to working in an office environment switched to be teleworkers almost overnight. And that is a big feat when you start thinking about that. You think about people in office environments and how quickly we as a society were able to adapt to the teleworker environment. Teachers and professors switched their curriculars to be 100% focused to online learning. The healthcare industry went from dabbling in telemedicine to making this part of their practice in terms of keeping appointments, doing checkups on patients for follow-up appointments, trying to be as business as usual, but still keeping the overall society's best interest at heart as a whole, making sure that those that are compromised aren't in situations where they could be exposed. I'll admit, teleshop was never a problem for me. I was pretty good at it. However, I've switched my shopping habits in terms of what I shop for, convenience for necessity. And tele-everything covers everything else, things that I probably haven't even thought of. One thing that I always point out, I was so impressed by the local restaurants as well as the chain restaurants' adaptability in this time of crisis to quickly create online menus if ones did not exist and provide family takeout options, really taking into consideration on the change of habits that people are going to have from entering restaurants and sitting down at tables to actually taking the food home. Well, all of this said, and the switch from convenience to necessity, part of this presentation is really to make sure that you are providing equal access to on all of your online efforts and how we can help you understand what that means. One point that I would like to bring up that Deque is participating and has partnered with the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, also known as IAAP. And this is a survey that has been put out. Laura's going to be putting the actual survey link in the chat of the Zoom meeting. And this survey is for the professionals to come together in terms of accessibility, digital accessibility, and have an understanding of what this impact of COVID-19 has had overall on digital accessibility. So I'm going to pause just for a second so you're able to take that link, and we really encourage you to please participate. We invite all of you to participate in this survey. It's a short survey, it won't take up much time. So for the webinar today, I'm gonna provide a brief introduction to disabilities and accessibility, touch briefly on accessibility during COVID-19. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Glenda, who's going to get into a lot of features and functions and how you can make sure that what you're posting digitally is compliant, how to make sure that there's no barriers now on what you're doing. We're all scrambling to put up new content, to put up new announcements, and it's really important to have this information in your back pocket. And then we'll end by briefly discussing sustaining accessibility moving forward. So to start, we talk about what is a disability. And on my slide, I have the official disabilities listed. They're visual, hearing, motor, speech, and cognitive. It's really important when you see a listing or hear a listing like this of the official disabilities to understand there's a lot of things that go with each of these. Visual, you think of a person who may have lost their sight. But remember, there's low vision users as well. There are varying degrees of sight loss or being able to, from a visual perspective, seeing things depending on your level of your sight. Hearing, there's loss of hearing, there's being able to have hard of hearing, having some hearing, maybe in one ear, not the other. So there's varying degrees of disability types under the official disability banner, so to speak. And one of the ones that sometimes is hard to understand or to have an understanding of how to make sure that you're adhering to it is cognitive disabilities. And those are, there's various types of cognitive disabilities. When we think about what is disability, there's a definition. Accessibility is when all people, regardless of disability, can get the same information and use the same functionality. Accessibility is a civil right, if we think about it in general. I've had the pleasure through my career of working with several countries that are implementing the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So you think about that from a global perspective of countries are actually signing up and ratifying and making sure that they're incorporating the treaty all around rights of persons with disabilities. And this has been happening for years. And then there's accessibility laws and policies that are adopted by specific countries. I'm going to I'm going to talk to some of the United States, things that I have been seeing here, because a lot of things that not only from a legal perspective, but there's a lot of regulatory in certain markets that have sort of bubbled up digital accessibility to be a higher priority in terms of regulations. And what we've seen from that is we've seen a sprinkled effect. So if one market is being regulated and part of those regulations is to include non-discrimination or equal access, they are putting in policies in place that impact the greater commercial market that may be selling into them because they put specific procurement policies and rules in place that are now affecting vendors that sell into them. So I call it the sprinkle or the trickle effect of how all of this has bubbled up. And yes, there's still a high risk in terms of legal and law, but there's also a lot of risk in the business community on doing business together. And most of that is driven through procurement. And the more the accessibility laws and policies come into place, procurement plays a large part in that. So accessibility during COVID-19, one of the things that I always like to talk about a little bit is we show a diagram here or an image of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a motivational theory in psychology. It's basically a 5-tier model of human needs, and it's usually shaped as a pyramid. To be funny, we've added a 6th layer here of toilet paper because somehow this has become part of our human basic needs through this crisis. I would like to have a whole webinar on just an explanation of that, but I would like somebody else to present that part. I will not be presenting why toilet paper has become such a need in this crisis. But in all seriousness, I wanted to concentrate on 2 areas that we have not discussed. One is online financing, and the other one is emergency information. As stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders are in effect, online banking is key to our society. And people are accessing their online banking information instead of going into the brick-and-mortar facilities to limit exposure, but to still conduct their daily lives. These should also be providing accessible experiences for all. All online banking should be able to be accessible so there is nobody left out not being able to get to the information they need. I've had several colleagues and friends comment to me on how inaccessible some of the content that they are finding out on the web, in particular some of their state emergency websites that are posting specific to COVID-19. Later in this presentation, Glenn is going to go through and provide some basics in terms of accessibility knowledge and to give you some tools to help be able to understand how to do the basics and have basic knowledge around how you can make sure that what you're publishing is accessible. But one of the things that we have seen is a lot of these emergency sites are going straight to publishing PDFs, and it's important to understand that PDF documents will need to be accessible as well. Accessibility has never been more important than it is right now. Everybody's getting their information online, whether it's news media, whether it is to support your necessities, or basically to maybe it's your entertainment means, to go online and work on an online world in terms of adhering to and maintaining some sort of sanity through our stay-at-home and shelter-in-place process, or it's your mainstay because of your work environment. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Glenda.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tammy. So Tammy's laid out why accessibility is even more important today than ever. And then the next question is, how are we going to measure digital accessibility? How are we going to know when we succeed? The answer is quite simple. It's called WCAG. WCAG is the international standard for digital accessibility. End of story, but let me explain exactly what WCAG is. So WCAG is an international standard. The WC stands for web content. It was published in 2008. And the AG stands for accessibility guideline. On the slide, I've crossed out the words web and content because when this was originally written, it was written with the broadest intentions in mind. So rather than just assigning it to HTML, it can be applied to any digital asset, whether that's a kiosk, a point of service sales, or a native app or a desktop app. So I want you to think of this guideline really as a digital accessibility guideline. And if you're new to WCAG and trying to figure out what are the levels of compliance, there are 3 levels of compliance for the standard. And I want to tell you without question, the standard for compliance is both A and AA. A is the lowest level of conformance. It helps with many barriers for people who have blindness, deafness, or motor disabilities, may not be able to use a mouse. The AA picks up some very important barriers for low vision and has a tiny bit of help for cognitive. It is inclusive of A. And then there's a AAA option. In the standard itself, while I, as an accessibility evangelist, love more accessibility than less, I will say that when trying to do accessibility in an emergency situation, AAA is not something you should try to achieve. Even in the standard itself, it says not recommended as a general policy for your entire site. So WCAG A and AA are where it's at. Another thing that I really want to make sure you understand if you're new to WCAG is there are multiple versions out there. Whatever you do, if you stumble across the ancient WCAG 1.0, just keep moving. That is not what we're working on. It has been superseded. It's from 1998, which is, you know, like so old in digital years, right? WCAG 2.0 is the standard in the United States that is used the most. It was published in 2008, and there are 38 requirements listed at the A and AA level. Now, some people on this call are coming to us from Europe. And Europe, being forward-thinking, has already picked up WCAG 2.1. It's the DOT release that was published in June of 2018. That release has 50 requirements, which include all 38, word for word, of the WCAG 2.0 requirements. It just adds 12 new ones. As I mentioned, it's already adopted in the European Union, and it is a best practice to use it immediately. However, if you're in an emergency situation and you're in the US, I would recommend absolutely start with WCAG 2.0 as your foundation. That's already going to get you a large chunk of the way there for WCAG 2.1. So now we know how to measure digital accessibility. And what we need to look at next is, what are the first steps that we're going to take? We care about equal access and the civil rights. And so how do we start? Well, I'm going to make it really easy. I'm just going to give you 3 steps for beginning. We're going to look at keyboard issue. We're going to look at form labels, and we're going to look at automated testing. When it comes to the keyboard, this is one of the simplest things that you can teach your developers to do. It requires no extra equipment. It requires a 30-second to 1-minute story of why it's important. And then your developers can learn to do this. Your QA people can learn to do this. Are you ready for the story? I want to introduce you to my friend Jean. This is a picture of Jean and I at an event in Austin. And Jean is a wonderful human being who happens to not have full use of his hands. So Jean cannot use a mouse. There are many people with motor disabilities and anyone that's blind who cannot use a mouse because a mouse requires manual dexterity. A mouse also requires you to be able to see where the arrow is pointing before you click. So to help people who are blind and to help people like Jean who may not have the ability to use a mouse, I got one simple thing for you to tell your developers to do. And that is, can you use your website without touching your mouse, without touching your trackpad? And you know what, developers, they're actually already pretty good at this. If you set this as a requirement, it is one of the easiest and most impactful first steps that you can do at your developer stage and at your QA stage. So you could implement that one this afternoon. I want to give you one more to start, and that is related to form labels. I'm going to choose form labels because it's one of the most frequent accessibility issues we find causing barriers. I noticed somebody earlier saying that the banking in Italy sites are inaccessible, and I imagine that form labels is one of those issues. Keyboard's probably another. And so what am I talking about with form labels? Let's take a look at a really good example. There's a company, Intuit. I happen to use them for my own personal taxes. When I log in to Intuit, Intuit has cared about accessibility for years. They have associated the form labels with the individual form fields. And so on screen, I have an image of my login screen for TurboTax when I was doing my taxes the other day. Luckily, they're not due, so I can wait a little bit longer, but still. Took a screenshot of that. Can you go back one? Can you go back one, Tammy? Awesome, thanks. On the screen to the left is my screen reader's verbiage of what form controls are available to a blind person. So the screen reader, as I tabbed to that first field, would read out loud phone number, email, or user ID required, edit text. And the next checkbox where you and I see a little green check and it says remember me next to it, the screen reader would say remember me, checked, checkbox. So this is what I mean when I say form labels attached to the form fields so that a screen reader can actually get the information. The screen reader that I'm using here is VoiceOver. I happen to do that because I'm on a Mac. On PC, there are 2 screen readers available, and or 2 primary screen readers available. There are more, but NVDA and JAWS, all of them have this capability. So now let's look under the hood and see, how did Intuit do that? So I'm gonna get geeky for a moment here. I promise it's the only geeky slide I have, but I wanted to show you that it's as simple as those words, phone number, email, or user ID, being wrapped in what's called a label tag. And then the input, the text field where we enter data, has a unique ID. In this example, I just named it user ID. And if you look back up the label tag, the 4 equals says, yo, this label text, phone number, email, or user ID, is explicitly for the input field that has the ID of user ID. It's for user ID. So it's very simple coding to solve this. Developers can learn it and do it and test for it reliably. The impact is profound. Let me explain how profound it is in this time period, because I want you to imagine that you lived alone, and let's say you are blind, and so you depend on a screen reader. You need some basic groceries. You need some bread, some milk, maybe you need some toilet paper, and you're super excited. You log on to your local grocery store, and you see that some pieces of it are accessible, and you found a delivery time that works, and oh my word, they actually have the essential items you need. You're excited, you throw them in your virtual cart, and then you go to checkout. And unfortunately, if the form labels are not labeled correctly, while a sighted person gets to the checkout screen and sees, oh, I need to add a new card with my credit card number, my first name, my last name, and so forth. If those form fields are not labeled, like I showed you earlier, the screen reader doesn't know what to tell you. It's a guessing game. In this example, I show the voiceover verbiage would basically say for each one of those fields, edit text, if it's a text field, or the month and year field, which we can see would merely say pop-up button. And you would have no idea what it's for. This would be a blocker. So filling out forms requires the accessible form labels. And those are 2 things out of many that you can do. They're very valuable first steps. The 3rd step that I promised to tell you about is the easy automated tests. This is a really, really powerful thing to put in your hands today. The test for automated that I'm going to offer you is free. It's an extension that you can put into your browser. It works in Chrome or Firefox. You can run it in the browser on any of your web pages, and it will list automatically found accessibility issues. It'll describe the problem. It'll tell you exactly what piece of code is causing the problem. There's an explanation of how to fix it. And did I mention it's free? This is very powerful. It is offered by Deque. I'm really super proud to work for a company that shared this tool open source so that we can move accessibility forward in major, major ways. So what I recommend you do is take that link and make sure that your developer team can have their sword, their bow, and their axe to fight against accessibility. As we look at these opportunities, you may say, Glenda, I already knew those first ones. I have been doing keyboard, I've been doing form labels, and I have been using Axe, and I want to go the next step. Just in case you're one of those, I wanted to make sure that I gave you something valuable as well. So we have this wonderful resource that Laura is going to put a link to in chat, and it's an accessibility checklist Remember earlier when Tammy was explaining the 5 major categories of disabilities, and Glenda was talking about WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 and why this is important? Well, many people want a top 10 or a top 12 list of what can I do right now? If you want to stay with just the 3 that I gave you, that's a fantastic start. If you want to take the top 12 and move a little bit further, here's a fabulous resource that I wanted to share with you. And I want to give you one more thing. What if you're in such a state of accessibility emergency that you don't have time to get your developers to do this? You don't have time to learn one thing. You need somebody else to do it for you. I have an amazing solution for you. It literally is called Amaze. It was invented by our Chief Technical Officer, Dylan. And when he first told me about this, I made him prove it to me because it just sounded too good to be true. But this service, it's not free, but this service allows us to fix your urgent accessibility issues. We have our Deque experts identify your specific issues that are causing barriers. We have our Deque developers code custom solutions. No one size fits all here, gang, not here. These are your custom code solutions. And then with your developers adding a single line of code on the pages that have a problem, these solutions can be brought into your web page on live sites. So we have done this on major financial banking sites, major shopping sites with traffic like you wouldn't believe. So this is tried and true. I just wanted to mention that just in case you don't have the resources to do this internally and need to outsource it to us. This is a solution that I want to recommend as a temporary urgent solution. I really want you to be self-sustaining and be able to fix it yourself. But sometimes we need to move faster than that. So with that, I want to hand it back over to Tammy and say, Tammy, what's next in this story?
Great, thank you so much, Glenda. That was all great information. I'm going to just talk briefly about the accessibility journey. One of the things that we always get asked is, where do I start? So the most common place to start is your public-facing customer content, your core service, your core services, and your functional part of your website is really, really important to concentrate on in terms of making sure that you are providing equal access and that you're providing an accessible journey for users coming to your site. Digital accessibility compliance is a journey. So is it a project? Is it a journey? Those are questions we always get asked. It's definitely a journey that can be accomplished through projects, if that's the answer. That is a little complicated. So the journey is making sure that you're testing your sites, that you've trained your folks that are content authors, as well as your developers and your template, the creators of your templates, to make sure you're always doing testing and training those that are creating, put the proper tools in place to support their efforts, and making sure you have the right support in terms of policies internally, and that if you're using any third-party components that you have written into all your procurement and your contracts, that you require your third-party vendors to provide their level of compliance. And there's lots of ways to do that, and honestly that is a whole separate conversation, but it is important enough to understand that that there is components into helping organizations meet success in terms of their digital accessibility initiatives. So whether you are posting new content to your website to adhere to the COVID-19 crisis, whether you are changing your site in terms of redesigning or adding new pages to facilitate user interaction with your site, knowing that your traffic is probably spiked in this time, that making sure that you're incorporating digital accessibility at the design phase is really critical to making sure that the flow within your organization isn't always create, develop, fix. You want to make sure that you're incorporating everything through design into development through tools and knowledge to actually be able to publish and put forth accessible content. And this bodes true whether we were in crisis or not, but in a crisis state, it's important to, at the very least, implement the suggestions that Glenda has outlined, as well as potentially incorporate the 12 steps that you will find information on if you download the 12-step paperwork that Laura put into the chat window. It is also, you have the ability to incorporate digital accessibility throughout your agile development cycle. So we have our Chief Technology Officer, who Glenda mentioned before, has published a book, Agile Accessibility Explained. There'll be a link in the chat as well. This is a very easy read. It's not a lengthy book, but there's a lot of great information for you all to review and understand where in the journey that you might need to increase your efforts, or you might read it and just to be in total agreement, and it's how you've put forth your organization's initiatives in general. So although we don't have time today to go into every step of the Agile process and how we can basically facilitate or provide the tools necessary to help you in this experience, I thought it was worth mentioning the book and to provide you the link so you could go see it yourself. And with that said, I'm going to go and turn the presentation back over to Glenda, and we're talking a little bit about accessibility drivers.
So out of curiosity, I wonder how many of you are motivated to do accessibility because of COVID, or is it a legal risk avoidance? Is it because you care about people with disabilities and want equal access? Perhaps you just have a commitment to do what is right. You want to feel good about your company and what you're doing for all your employees and your customers. But have you ever thought about doing accessibility because it's profitable? That it's actually smart business? I wanted to make sure that even in this time of emergency situations, that we look beyond the crisis and think about the additional market. So there is a hidden market, and just looking at the disposable income by disability types, we have a large market available to us. And when things are not accessible, you're really, really missing out on that. So whether it's the market of people with visual disabilities or hearing disabilities or motor or cognitive or independent living, what I think is fascinating, I put a link earlier in the chat, is that a lot of focus right now is on vision, hearing, and the ability to use a mouse. And we've got a whole opportunity in the cognitive area, but that's another topic entirely. As we're looking at this market, I want you to take these numbers back with you. The purchasing power in the United States of working age adults with disabilities, for example, is not small. It's $490 billion total after-tax disposable income. And that amount is comparable to markets like the African American market in the United States of 501 billion, or the Hispanic market of 582 billion. As a business, none of us would ever say, I'm going to ignore one of these other markets. The same thing can be said for the working age adults with disabilities. And beyond this particular disability income, there's the ripple effect of family and friends who choose not to use a service because it may not affect them individually, but the inaccessibility of that service or website impacts somebody they love. So on principle, they refuse to use it. So the impact of this is even larger. With that said, I could give an hour-long presentation on how important good design is for accessibility. And one of my mentors, John Slayton, actually said that good design is accessible design. When we design for the different disabilities, we are actually making for a better user experience for all. So if you remove these barriers, you will literally increase your ROI. With that said, Tammy, I made you cut some of your slides because I thought we were going to spend more time. So let's open up to questions.
Great, thanks, Glenda and Tammy. Really good content here. I have one quick question. Could you go back and cover how to solve accessibility issues in PDFs as organizations are publishing these during an emergency? How can those be tested and fixed?
So there is a checker inside the Adobe system, and I'm actually gonna exit my screen and I'm gonna get open an Adobe document and see if I can, let me see if I can pull one up. Okay. Let me see if I can get this one open. I had downloaded a logic puzzle for things to do during COVID. And I will tell you that I am not our PDF accessibility expert, so I'm clumsy at this, Laura.
No worries. We could put some links in the chat for our DQ course on PDF accessibility, if that's helpful for people. And we can come back to this question too.
You know what? I found it. My problem was that it moved in the new system. Let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, I think that Tammy will have to stop. Awesome. All right, desktop share. Okay, so I have opened up a document that I expect to not be accessible at all. I haven't tested it yet. 60 logic puzzles to keep from going corona crazy, okay? Inside Acrobat Pro, there is a Tools tab. And inside that Tools tab, if you'll roll way, way down, there's a accessibility tab that I found, which has an option for an accessibility report. And you can also do the full check right here and start checking. And it's going to tell you the different issue types. So there is a testing tool inside. Does it cover everything? No, but it's a good start, just like Axe is a good start for an HTML page. And there is another tool in here okay, it's somewhere in here. Yeah, I would have to ask, maybe it's the setup assistant, but I'd have to ask Denise. I know about this testing tool, so I hope that provided some information on that.
Great, thanks. So what's the most common primary or valuable screen reader to use when you're testing inside a Linux operating system. And for those who might not be aware, sometimes you use different combinations of screen readers for different types of testing to get coverage. So maybe we could touch on that a bit too, Glenda.
Absolutely. And so at Deque, we keep close watch on the screen readers that are being used throughout the world. And it doesn't matter so much as what the developer's doing. We have to look at what the consumers are doing. And the primary screen reader in the United States is, I think, NVDA right now. And that is, let me see if I can get NVDA screen reader. And it pairs best with Chrome. It works really well with Chrome. It also works with other browsers, but you can download it for free. I've just put the link in chat for, and it's actually not JAWS anymore, Gregory. It used to be, but I believe that it has just been nosed out by NVDA very recently. And so the second most popular screen reader in the United States is JAWS, which is very, very expensive. Then the next most popular after that is probably VoiceOver on Mac. And so on Linux specifically, I believe it is Orca, but I would want to talk and find out, are you the developer working on Linux, or are your consumers on Linux? Because it really doesn't matter where we are, it matters where your people using the screen readers are. So at Deque, what we primarily test in, we'll test in anything, but if someone only has enough funds for us to test in one screen reader on one platform, and we're talking desktop or laptop, it would be NVDA with Chrome is the first place that I would start. For the most impact, the most return on investment on your testing. And then in the mobile world, it would be iPhone, VoiceOver, and Android would have TalkBack.
Great, thanks, Glenda. I have a question here. How do we sighted testers learn the user behaviors of people who are visually impaired to prevent making updates based on assumption? For example, this person thought everything was supposed to be added to the tab order and that wasn't explained in their checklist.
Yeah, and that's one of the common problems that we find when people are first learning to do accessibility testing. The learning curve for a sighted person to understand how a screen reader works is challenging, and we get what we call a lot of false positives. Their expectations of what they think should happen are not accurate. And so my best solution to that is there's a wonderful course in Deque University on screen reader testing. And so that would be a cost reasonable way to learn that information, and not just to think, oh, I can go in a corner, install a screen reader and figure it out and never look at some materials that were published by an accessibility professional. The other thing that I find super, super valuable, I would certainly not lead with it, but usability testing with real people with disabilities is extraordinarily mind-opening. But I wouldn't want to go there until we know we have all the common bugs out. Your running axe is clean. You've had experienced professionals test for accessibility, and then we go to users with disabilities. But it's a very valuable insight.
Great, thanks, Glenda. Now, you did a really good job of covering critical things to fix for accessibility, such as, forms and things of that nature. But is there a way for people to know which issues are the most critical and which ones should be addressed first otherwise?
The specific thing that I would do from a comprehensive standpoint is to go through your paths, trying keyboard alone. And then the next thing would be to go through a path using a screen reader. and can you complete the task? So in the task of the grocery shopping, or I'm going to go to airlines because that would be a bad one in COVID. I'm going back to the grocery store. You scheduled a pickup time. You were able to put things into your cart. You were able to change amounts. You were able to completely check out. And those two runs with a person that understands how a screen reader would work and a person that understands how a keyboard would work are going to pick up a lot of your critical issues. And then I would always recommend a comprehensive WCAG 2.0 AAA check by an expert. But we can't always afford to do that on every page in every place at all times.
Great, thanks. So is there any guidelines for accessibility in printed materials that the attendee should know about? We did receive a question about that.
That is something that I have not been able to find. And so I would say that there are no legal guidelines that I'm aware of. On printed materials for accessibility. However, I think that you can apply the same principles on the size of text that you find on kiosks and ATMs, which I'd have to go dig up the size of the text. It's really curious. It's like 3/16 of an inch on the capital letter I. And then the color contrast issues I think are really important. And so what I would suggest is to that PDF that you're planning to print and put up on a wall, test it from a digital perspective. And if it passes the digital perspective, it should be just as accessible when it's printed on the wall, she says, knowing that a blind person's never going to see that thing on the wall. So I'll tell you what I've done in situations where I've had printed materials at an event. Just as an idea, this is not a requirement, but I add a QR code onto that material where all that same material is available in an accessible digital format. I usually put it in HTML.
Great. Another question here. We suggested ACTS as a free and quick way to start doing automated testing for accessibility, but this person is asking, is there an enterprise level license for that? And do we offer any other automated testing software that could help?
Tammy, I'm going to let you take that one.
Sure. Yes, there is an enterprise version. We have 3 different tools that are available commercially. We have our test product, which is specific to development environments. It provides its own browser plugin as well as the ability through APIs to integrate into continuous integration environments that are doing automated testing from a UI standpoint. And we have Assure, which is made available to anyone that is actually doing full accessibility testing within an organization who is deemed to be that person, whether it's QA or a person is sitting within a sprint team that is responsible for doing both automated and manual testing to determine a component or a site's level of compliance. And then we have a monitoring tool called Comply, and Comply can monitor a site from an automated perspective on a scheduled basis and provide information. We have that both as a managed service and as a tool that can be subscribed to.
Great, thanks, Tammy. Another question here. What tools would we recommend for non-accessibility experts to use for testing web accessibility for smartphones and/or tablets?
So on the iOS platform, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad, I would recommend VoiceOver, which that's a pretty steep ask because you've got to learn how VoiceOver works. And on Android, we actually do have an automated tester that you can use on the native apps. So let me go back and ask the question for who asked that. Are they talking native apps or are they talking websites? Because if they are talking websites and they just want to know if it's accessible on the phone, on the Android or iOS phone, doing the testing in Axe, in Firefox or Chrome is actually, if it works on the desktop, it should also work on those devices. It's only when you get into the native apps that you need to do the a different type of testing, and we do offer an Android Axe version for native apps. We cannot offer it for iOS without getting your developers to embed something in the code. It's just the way iOS code works. We're still hoping to get something in there, but we've been unable to just because of the way Apple works.
Great, thanks, Linda. And someone else asked, where can they learn more on mobile accessibility testing? I'd recommend, like as you suggested, starting with the assistive technologies on those devices, using Axe for Android, but then Deque University also offers some courses on mobile accessibility testing. But did you have any other recommendations for this person on where they can learn more on native mobile accessibility testing?
I think you nailed it. The one thing I would also recommend is the free resource on how to use the screen readers. So it's not simple to learn to use a screen reader, but I find these screen reader guides that I just put into chat incredibly useful. Because there's only so many screen reader shortcuts that I can keep in my head at one time, and I've got all the devices and all the platforms and all the screen readers. It's nice to have those printed out.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's a really useful resource. Another question here, kind of switching gears. Can any of our tools check EPUBs for accessibility?
I would have to check on that. Do you know that off the top of your head, Tammy?
Right, so we would have to take that offline. We'd have to see it, and we're certainly more than willing to do a proof of concept. Our tools are testing the UI, and we do have some tools within the tools that help us with some scripting if necessary. So we're happy to take that offline and do a proof of concept.
And Annika has said that Ace by Daisy can check EPUBs.
Okay.
Tammy and I are not EPUB experts, so that's why we would have to take it offline. Laura, there's a really cool question. Can I answer the one about how a deaf person can test a page for screen reader accessibility?
Yeah, go for it.
So, Erin, I love this question because there are times where a person with a disability is more challenged in doing full accessibility testing, because to test it, they might need that ability that they are disabled on. However, when I looked at your question, it dawned on me, remember when I showed you the example of Intuit and I had the screen reader verbiage up on screen? Both VoiceOver and NVDA have a written transcript, a live written transcript of what's being said. So a deaf person really could do screen reader testing. They would just be reading what the screen reader was saying as opposed to listening to it. Yep, speech viewer in tools, and I use it all the time. And we found that QA people, I had a group of QA folk working in a room together, and rather than using headphones, they actually turned the volume off on their computers and turned on the speech viewer. So even though they could hear, they were choosing to use the speech viewer instead of listening. I have a hard time listening to screen readers endlessly, and so I prefer to read too.
Awesome, great, that's really good. Good, helpful advice for those who are testing out there.
And Laura, I just want to point out, Kat did a great cut and paste about some of the Adobe YouTube information that Rob Haverty has put out there. He is one of their accessibility product leads. So I just want to let the folks know that thank you so much. Oh, Laura, did you put that in there? I'm sorry, I thought Kat put that in there.
Oh, Kat did, but looks like
Okay.
they just sent it
You reposted, okay.
Yeah, just reposted it for
Thank you.
people. No worries.
And there's a question, I think, on Acts for Android. I wanted to put in a specific link to that. And I actually went and bought an Android tablet recently because I had to see this for myself. And I installed Acts for Android. And if you go to this link that I just dropped into chat, there's a little purple man that shows up on the top of the screen, and then you can tap that and literally run color contrast or form fields labeled, the same types of tests that can be run on HTML. It actually can get to the code under the native app on Android alone. As I said, iOS devices, it's a black box, so we can't break into that box to do that type of testing on native Apple apps, at least not yet.